I found the photograph inside a cardboard box I was preparing to donate. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning, the kind of morning when nothing feels important enough to remember. I was standing in the spare bedroom of our house, sorting through clothes, old books, and things my husband and I had promised ourselves we would organize someday. Then an envelope slipped between two sweaters and landed on the floor. I almost threw it away without opening it. Almost. But there was something about the handwriting on the front that made me stop. My name wasn't on it. Neither was my husband's. It simply said, "For when we're finally free." My fingers went cold. I opened the envelope. Inside was a photograph. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. It was an old photograph taken inside what looked like a hotel room. Then I recognized him. My husband, Daniel. He was standing beside a woman, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. And the woman wasn't a stranger. It was Vanessa, my closest friend. The same Vanessa who had sat beside me at my wedding. The same woman who had held my hand when my father died. The same woman who had spent Christmas at our house only 3 months earlier. I stared at that photograph until my eyes began to burn. There was no date printed on it. No explanation. Just the two of them standing together, looking like people who had been sharing a secret for a very long time. And written across the back were 6 words. Soon, she know nothing. We'll leave. My husband came home 50 minutes later. Claire, I heard his keys hit the kitchen counter. I'm home. I quickly put the photograph back into the envelope and slipped it beneath a stack of old magazines. Hey, I answered. He walked into the room smiling. He kissed my cheek. Then he asked whether I wanted Thai food for dinner. I looked at the man standing in front of me and wondered how many times I'd looked directly into his eyes while he was hiding something enormous. For 11 years, Daniel had been my husband. We had bought our first house together. We had survived a failed business. We had celebrated promotions, birthdays, holidays, and ordinary Sunday mornings. I thought I knew every version of him. Apparently, I knew only the version he wanted me to know. That night, I didn't confront him. Instead, I watched. And what I noticed frightened me more than the photograph. Daniel had always been predictable. He came home at 6. He complained about traffic. He ate dinner. He watched the evening news. Then he answered emails before going to bed. But that night, his phone buzzed while he was sitting beside me. He glanced at the screen. His entire expression changed. What is it? I asked casually. Work. He turned the phone face down. A few minutes later, he went upstairs. I waited. Then I heard the shower. I walked into the kitchen and saw his jacket hanging over the chair. A hotel receipt fell from the pocket when I lifted it. The date was from 3 weeks earlier. The room had been booked for 2 people. I stood there holding the receipt while my heart pounded. Then I noticed the location. It wasn't anywhere near his office. It was a hotel less than 20 minutes from Vanessa's apartment. That was when I stopped hoping the photograph had some innocent explanation. The next morning, Daniel told me he had an important meeting after work. I smiled. Of course. He kissed my forehead. I might be late. I understand. But instead of going home after work, I followed him from a distance. I didn't need to get close. I watched him park outside a small restaurant downtown. 5 minutes later, Vanessa arrived. She wasn't dressed like someone meeting an old friend. She was carrying an overnight bag. They hugged. Then they walked inside together. I sat in my car for nearly an hour. I cried. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly, with both hands covering my face. Because the worst part wasn't discovering that my husband had betrayed me. It was realizing that the person I trusted most outside my marriage had been standing beside him. For the next 2 weeks, I stopped asking questions. Instead, I started asking myself better ones. How long had this been happening? What had they planned? And why had they written that I would know nothing? I began checking the parts of our life I'd always ignored. The household finances, the insurance policies, the property documents, the business account Daniel had insisted I didn't need to worry about. That was where I found something unexpected. A new company had been registered 6 months earlier. The listed director was Vanessa, but the mailing address belonged to a luxury apartment building across town. I knew that building. Daniel had once told me it was too expensive for ordinary people. Apparently, it wasn't too expensive for him. I hired an attorney before I touched a single dollar. She reviewed our accounts and found several transfers I'd never authorized. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. Daniel had been moving money into an account connected to the new company. My attorney told me something I would never forget. Don't confront him until you understand exactly what he's doing. So I waited. And while I waited, I discovered something even bigger. The photograph wasn't the beginning of their plan. It was almost the end. Daniel and Vanessa weren't simply planning an affair. They were preparing to sell the small technology company Daniel and I had built together. The company had started in our garage. I had invested my savings. I had handled the bookkeeping when Daniel was working 18-hour days. But now he had quietly arranged for Vanessa's company to purchase several of our assets. The money would disappear. The company would collapse. And Daniel would walk away with the profits while leaving me with the debts. Suddenly, the photograph made sense. They weren't just planning to leave me. They were planning to leave me with nothing. I didn't sleep that night. But I didn't cry either. Something inside me had changed. The woman who discovered the photograph was frightened. The woman sitting at the kitchen table that night was angry. And the woman who woke up the following morning was prepared. I gathered every financial document I could legally access. I saved copies of emails that belonged to our shared business. I met with my attorney again. Then I called the accountant who had worked with our company since the beginning. He reviewed the records and discovered that several invoices had been altered. Daniel had been creating fake expenses to make the company appear less profitable than it really was. He wanted to convince me to sell my ownership stake cheaply. Then he planned to buy it through the company Vanessa controlled. It was clever. It was organized. And it would have worked if I had remained the trusting wife he thought he married. Instead, I quietly changed the business authorization structure with my attorney's help. The sale was frozen. The suspicious transfers were documented. And I waited for Daniel to make his next move. 3 days later, he came home unusually cheerful. "I have good news," he announced. I smiled. "What kind of news?" "I think we're finally going to be financially free." He had no idea how close he was to losing everything he had been trying to steal. That weekend, Daniel suggested we attend a small dinner with Vanessa and several business associates. I agreed, but I made one request. I want to host it at our house. He smiled. Perfect. He thought he was walking into a celebration. He didn't know I had invited my attorney. I also invited the accountant and one other person. The potential investor Daniel had been secretly negotiating with. At 7 o'clock, everyone arrived. Daniel wore his favorite suit. Vanessa walked in carrying a bottle of expensive wine. She hugged me. "Claire, you look beautiful." I smiled back. "So do you." For the first hour, everything looked normal. We ate. We laughed. Daniel talked about the company's future. Vanessa sat beside him. Then Daniel stood. "I'd like to make a toast." He lifted his glass. "To new beginnings." I looked around the table. Then I stood too. That's exactly what I wanted to talk about. Daniel's smile disappeared. I placed a folder on the table. Inside were copies of the suspicious transfers, the hotel receipt, the company registration, the altered invoices, and finally, a copy of the photograph. Vanessa stopped breathing. Daniel stared at me. "Where did you get that?" I looked at him calmly. "From the box you thought I would never open." He reached for the photograph. I pulled it away. "No." The room became completely silent. Daniel looked at Vanessa, then back at me. "Claire, you don't understand." "I understand enough." Vanessa began crying. Daniel tried to explain that their relationship had started after our marriage had supposedly fallen apart. I laughed, not because it was funny, because it was insulting. "Our marriage fell apart," I asked. "You were planning to steal the company I helped build." He couldn't answer. Then I placed another document on the table. "This is the notice freezing the proposed sale." Daniel's face turned pale. "And this," I continued, "is the report documenting the transfers." Vanessa looked at Daniel. "You told me everything was handled." He said nothing. That was the moment she realized she had been lied to too. Daniel had promised her a future. He had promised her money. He had promised her freedom. But apparently, he had also promised her things he never had the right to give away. The investor slowly pushed his chair back. "I think I'm leaving." Daniel tried to stop him, but the damage was already done. The meeting was over. The business deal was dead, and the secret was finally out. Daniel followed me into the hallway after everyone left. Please. I turned around. For 11 years, you were my husband. He lowered his head. I'm sorry. I shook my head. You aren't sorry because you hurt me. You're sorry because I found out. He had nothing to say. I handed him an envelope. Inside were divorce papers. But there was one more thing. A letter from my attorney explaining that every attempt to transfer our jointly owned assets had been documented. Daniel stared at the papers. You're really doing this? I looked at him. No, Daniel. I already did it. I walked upstairs and packed a suitcase. Not because I was leaving my life behind, because I was leaving him behind. The next morning, I drove away from the house we had built together. For the first time in 11 years, I didn't know what my future looked like. But I knew one thing. I would rather face an uncertain future alone than spend another day living inside someone else's lie. Sometimes betrayal doesn't destroy you. Sometimes it simply forces you to stop protecting people who never protected you. And sometimes the greatest revenge isn't watching someone suffer. It's rebuilding your life so completely that the person who betrayed you eventually realizes they lost the one thing they could never replace, you. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more emotional stories about betrayal, secrets, and unexpected new beginnings.